Hey y'all, my name is Lauren Frosto, and today we'll be talking about nurses' perceptions of automated dispensing cabinets, an observational study, and an online survey. So the purposes of this research study was to assess nurses' perceptions of the ADCs and the impacts of their on their work, and to gather user experience, recognize problems, and improve the usability of ADCs. So, a little bit of a brief background. Automated dispensing cabinets were introduced in the 1980s in the United States, and since have been increasingly used to automate and rationalize the medication process in hospitals and other healthcare facilities. And in May of 2015, a new part of the hospital was completed, and 32 ADCs were introduced in the OR and ICU in Finland. So, the system manages storage control and provides computer-controlled real-time monitoring and tracking of medicine use and waste. This is expected to reduce unnecessary movement into and out of the operating theater during operations. The previous studies indicated behavioral challenges were often more significant than technical ones in the implementation of ADCs. So, why is it necessary to conduct this research? So, ADCs were relatively new technology in Europe, making it important to study their implementation in this setting, and that nurses were primary users of these, making their perceptions crucial for successful implementation. So, and it also is important to assess if ADCs could help rationalize the medication process and reduce errors. And it is critical to understand the challenges and resistance, and if there's any resistance to change. So the methods used in this research were two different. So one was a observational component with a pre-post design in which observations were conducted before and after ADC implementation. And there was also a survey component, which was an online questionnaire using the Likert scale, which is just on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you disagree or how strongly do you agree? And closed-ended and open-ended questions, and questions about the impact and satisfaction of the ADCs. So the study subjects were, of course, nurses in the OR and intensive care units. Ages ranged from 60 being the highest age and 20 being the lowest age. And the majority were 50 to 59 years of age. And the majority, which is 83%, being female and 17% being male. So the procedures used to obtain the data were a direct observation of the nurses, both before and after the introduction of ADCs, and an online survey for the nurses afterwards. So the materials used for this data collection were the observations that were put together on paper first and then later put into an electronic database, and also a questionnaire through SurveyPal, which is just a survey site that they use in Europe. And then that was exported into an statistics site for Windows, and a step-by-step description of how the research was conducted. So an online survey was developed for this study and distributed in April of 2017 to 346 nurses in the OR and the ICU. And a link to the questionnaire on SurveyPal was sent to nurses through their official work emails with a deadline of 4 weeks to respond. And the questionnaire consisted of different parts. the nurses' socio-demographic and practice characteristics, closed and open-ended questions about whether the ADCs had an impact on their work and whether they have had any problems with them, and questions about the use of ADCs, and questions about the impact of ADCs on patient safety, and also 18 statements on the ADCs with a 5-point Likert scale, which 1 being how strongly do you disagree, and 5 being that I strongly agree. And a question about the overall satisfaction, and 2 open-ended questions about suggestions for improvement and free comments. And the first of the 2 observation periods were carried out in April to May of 2014, a year before the introduction of the ADCs in the OR and the ICU. And the second observation period was conducted in the same units in April to May of 2016, a year after the introduction of them. And the observation periods consisted of 5 consecutive days, which equaled 8 hours per day in both units. And the activities of the nurse at the time and the time spent with medication-related and other tasks and movements in and out of the operating theater during surgical procedures were recorded, and also any signs of resistance to change among the nurses were also recorded. So the procedures used for the data analysis, all observations were first recorded manually, and at the end of the observation day, entered into an electronic database. And also an online questionnaire was developed for the study, and it was distributed in April of 2017 to those 346 nurses in the OR and the ICU. And again, the questionnaire was sent on SurveyPal and was sent to their official work emails with a 4-week deadline. So the results that they had found were that the time spent on dispensing and preparing medications, including searching for the medications, taking medications from the cabinet, preparing the said medications, and marking them in the operating theater for elective surgery, decreased on average by 32 minutes per 8-hour shift after the introduction of the automated dispensing cabinets. The majority, which would be 68 of the 81% respondents, were satisfied with the ADCs, and attitudes to ADCs were more positive in the ICU than they were in the OR. Nearly 80% of nurses in the ICU and 42% of the nurses found that ADCs make their work easier. Some resistance to change was observed in the OR in the form of non-compliance with some instructions. The nurses took medications from the ADCs when somebody else was logged in, and the barcode was not always used. The results of this survey support the findings. So the conclusions that they came to were that overall, nurses were satisfied with the ADCs and stated that they make their work easier. And in the ICU, nurses were more satisfied with the ADCs and complied with instructions better than nurses in the OR. One reason for that is that there was a more extensive period in the ICU than there was in the OR, and that some of my thoughts about the importance of the results for the nursing practice is that the use of ADCs were implemented to help streamline medication administration and focus more on patient care, which the results of the survey and the observations do agree with my statement that the ADCs do help streamline the medication administration process. And some research weaknesses that I found that could affect some of their results were that uneven pilot phase implementation between units. The ICU had a longer implementation phase than the OR, which could affect comparison results. Also, that there was a short observation period that may not represent typical work days because they were only observed in an 8-hour period. And usually, depending on where you work, especially in the ICU, you are working 12-hour shifts. And the potential response bias, as participation was voluntary, and there was also a 4-week deadline period, so people could forget to do it or just decide not to do it. And that is the end. Thank you for listening, and I hope y'all have a great day.